So, we have a young lady here tonight that raises night crawlers. And she brought some with her for you guys. So she's got a tub of 1,000 crawlers that can be kept inside your house. They don't have to be refrigerated and they'll stay alive for a long, long time. They're European. And she says that they double quickly, so you might even last you right through summer. Who knows? But she's going to give us 1,000 to raffle off, and we'll give it to the highest bidder, whoever wants it. We'll start at 20 bucks. Anybody want to say 20 bucks?
Shipman, Brian Shipman, 20 bucks.
No, I think that was Jeff Rossetti that said 20 bucks, right?
$5.
$5, $20. Starts at 20.
I gotta see it. Where are they?
I thought you were going to go help her bring them in.
I'm gonna bring the truck around. You got a name on.
All right. 20 bucks. Anybody else? 20 bucks. Come on. The money goes to the kids. 20 bucks. 1,000 crawlers. Put them in your store. Ramel, where are you? Put them in your store. You sell. She said she's catching pike with them through the ice. Interested? 25. 20. 20 bucks. 20 bucks. 25? He just said 25. 30. 30. You gonna open your mouth again, Jeff? All right, 30 bucks for Mel. Thank you. All right. All right, now we're going to listen to Brad Young from U.S. Fish and Wildlife Lake Champlain Sea Lamprey Management Program. He's going to enlighten us on lamprey, and then we're going to have the raffle.
All right, thanks. So first, Brian Shipman told you how can't find any small salmon. Then Brian Kluver said we got too many birds, can't do anything about it. Well, guess what? We're putting the smackdown on lamprey. I got good news to share. It's not all bad news. So anyway, I'm Bradley Young. I coordinate the Lake Champlain Sea Lamprey Control Program for the Fish and Wildlife Service, but of course work with Brian, who has for a long time been working with sea lamprey control for the state. And we also coordinate with New York State DEC, who's a partner in the program. So the two state agencies and my office work together on this. So I always want to start off a little bit with what are sea lamprey. Most everybody in here is familiar with sea lamprey, but there's some things about them that are a little bit strange, and not only do they look strange and act strange, but I get a lot of people asking questions about things that tell me that maybe we don't always have all the information about how sea lamprey live, reproduce, behave, act, and things like that. I get questions like, well, why don't you treat all the rivers every single year? That'd be better for lamprey control. Well, there's a reason we don't do that. I'm going to give a little bit of biology information to help everybody understand that. First of all, just some weird things about lamprey. They are 400 million years old as far as their species presence on the planet, as far as we know. So they've been around since before the dinosaurs. They were here during the dinosaurs, and they're still here now. So they're a long-lived species and one of the most ancestral species on the planet right now, matter of fact. They're really weird. Anybody who's caught one and chopped it in half, which is a good thing, has noticed they don't have a real backbone. They've got what's called a notochord. They don't have any real bones in their body. They've got cartilage, and this is an artifact of them being a very ancestral ancient species, back before animals had backbones. So it makes them a little bit strange. They're even a missing link, if you will, in some ways. We have researchers from the University of Montreal who coordinate with us, and when we trap them, we give them our lamprey, and they do research on things like how an animal like this has a strange backbone or lack of backbone, almost backbone, if you will, and how they can use that for spinal cord regeneration research. So even though lamprey are terrible for fish, they can serve some purposes, even if it is backbone research in Montreal. As you know, everybody in here understands that lamprey don't have a true jaw. This is a big deal from a physiology or from an anatomy standpoint. You know they've got a sucker mouth on them and they attach to things, but they can't chew. I don't know how many times I've had people say, oh, these lamprey bit me, and a lamprey bit. No, lamprey can't bite. There's no biting involved in lamprey. So if anybody talks about lamprey bites, let them know they don't have jaw bones. All they can do is attach and suck. The other thing, again, they are a fish. You can't believe how many times I've heard that I got these worms and these big parasites or snakes or whatever else. But lamprey are a fish, and what makes them a fish is that they have gills. So it's a pretty low bar to achieve, and lamprey have done that. They're parasitic, as you know. They attach to other animals, and the juvenile phase, which I'll talk a little bit about in a second, is where they really grow and thrive. And as a parasite, they depend on another animal to supply its nutritional needs. Now, that's during one phase of its life. I'll talk in a minute about how it's the case that they're not a parasite for their entire life, only a portion of their life. And the thing that allows us to be successful in controlling them, thank goodness, is their primitive physiology. And what I mean by that is that because they're so ancestral, like I mentioned how they're 400 million years old on the planet, when they first came into being, their enzymes, their body chemistry, the way they regulate things is different than, let's say, bass or trout or perch or what we call higher fishes. They're more primitive in just the number of enzymes and metabolites and things in their system, and because of that, we can use things like TFM, the chemical we use to kill them, to overwhelm their system. And then they don't have the capability of detoxifying that, whereas minnows and perches and basses and trouts and things of that sort do have that higher physiology and can detoxify those and withstand the poison that we put in the water. So we use their own physiology against them. And I mentioned here that only a portion of their life is parasitic, and it's a very short portion of their life, matter of fact. So as a larvae, they're non-parasitic. You're probably never going to see a larval lamprey unless you're out with Tony someday shocking in a stream. The larvae live in the sediment underneath of the rivers, and they're buried there for up to about 4 years. And they live in that situation. I try to show people they burrow down with their head and then come back up again, and their head is right at the surface of the sediment-water interface, and they sit there for 4 years, not the same hole, but in a river, that position I should say. And whatever falls in their mouth, they eat. And if it happens to be something that provides nutrition, they swallow it. If it's sand, then they spit it back out again. It's a very dubious existence, but they manage to slowly and slowly and slowly grow over 4 years. And at that point, leave and then enter the juvenile phase, parasitic. So people who know lamprey and the damage they cause, you guys are seeing the juvenile stage. And we call them juveniles. If you think about relating this to humans, juvenile basically in fish speak, fish language, means not sexually mature. So this is after they've become their adult looking form, but they haven't become mature enough to make new lamprey yet. That's when they're parasitic. So they're in the lake, they're attaching to fish, but they're not able to reproduce yet. That's the parasitic phase. Once they finally get old enough and they get enough fat on their body and changes happen, they decide to head back in, then they're an adult, and then they're not parasitic anymore. Then their whole meaning in life is just to reproduce. They don't feed, they don't do anything other than reproduce. They're a one-trick show at that point. So with sea lamprey, I think it's fascinating. Again, most people in here are familiar with lamprey in their parasitic phase, but when you look at the graph here, this pie chart, it really kind of gives you an idea of what lamprey's life cycle looks like, and not only how complex it is, but the amount of time spent in each phase. So as an egg, or what we even call a prolarvae, it's about a month. They're only in this phase, this is usually June. So the month of June is this 1 month right here. Then for the next 53 months, we're talking over 4 years, they're in this larval stage. And that one's not buried, and I'll show you in a following slide what they look like when they are buried. But they spend 4 years in that stage. Then the one that everybody in here knows, they only spend 15 months in this parasitic phase. This is the parasitic juvenile phase. This is when they're in the lake and attached to fish. But once they finally mature past that, then we get the big adults. And you may see an adult if you're fishing in December and the frostbite fleet's out there, the great big ones attached. around December, January, they drop off of fish, they stop feeding, and they gear up for a springtime migration to go in and reproduce. So even in the wintertime, if you pull one through the ice, you're not going to catch an adult attached to a pike in February. They're just not feeding at that point. You might get a big larva or a big juvenile, but you're not going to get an adult. All right, so here's actually what a larvae looks like. So you can see them burrowing down into the sand. So you can kind of watch the tail go, see, here he goes in the back, going down underneath. They're really pretty amazing. They use the sand just like water. And they go down underneath, and then eventually they'll slowly come back up so that just their mouth is at the sediment interface. Here's a picture here of some lake trout right off the reef by the ferry to Plattsburgh, right by the hatchery here for Kevin. This is film footage from Ellen Marsden. You can see a bunch of these lakers here with lamprey attached to them. This is the olden days when it was bad. It's gotten better. But I always thought it was interesting to be able to see these naturally, just what it looks like to see a lamprey on a fish. And that's a lot of lamprey for a small number of fish. But these are lakers spawning in the fall. Just wanted to add that in there.
Brad, is that all eggs or zebra mussels?
Zebra mussels, unfortunately. And I had this little presentation here really quick. I thought it was interesting that the word for lamprey in Latin is petromyzon, which means rock sucker. And it's kind of a strange name, but here's how it got its name. Here's an adult building a nest. You can see him moving that rock. When they were first named, it was because they would pick up good-sized rocks. Here, watch this big one he's got. See him moving that thing? That's how they build the nest. So they got their name from that. Well, once they get their nest formed, then these big adults in the stream go in and they clean out the nest. And they use their tail to fan it out. There, you can see that? They're blowing all the little fine sediment out of the way, so they just have the perfect size gravel to put their eggs in. And then once they got the nest all set up and the nursery established, they go in and make it happen. Here's a male and a female paired up. They wrap themselves around each other like snakes. And you can see here another one. There's a male and a female releasing the eggs. Here comes the eggs right at your face. A couple got out of the nest. But just some amazing footage of seeing lamprey in action, trying to make new lamprey, which is our goal to stop that. Yeah, we call that too. So anyway, just some neat footage to show a little bit about lamprey that you don't usually see. What I do and like what is the need? Why do I have a job? It's because sea lamprey are out of balance with the host species in Lake Champlain. There's a need for lamprey control, and some of these pictures here just show that. And it's not just the native species that we tend to talk about the most, being lake trout and Atlantic salmon. It's also things like sturgeon. We find them on catfish. We find them on pike. I even have a picture of somebody had one on a smelt. So I mean, there are lamprey. If there's something that's worthy of feeding a lamprey, the lamprey will find it. That being said, though, they're going to go for the easiest and the most beneficial host species. And in Lake Champlain, that's going to be the trouts and the salmon. So. Also, what is the justification? It might be choppy on the mic. Okay, all right. I hear feedback myself, but what is the need? Well, from the Fish and Wildlife Service perspective, we don't just control lamprey because we hate lamprey. That's not why we control sea lamprey. The lamprey in itself, as a species, isn't necessarily a bad thing. Lamprey, as I've said before, have been around for 400 million years. They haven't been a problem until we started having conflict with humans, and they invasively got into areas where they hadn't previously occupied. So we have lamprey on one side of the state, in the Connecticut River, where we're actually actively trying to restore sea lamprey. Well, they belong in the Connecticut River, because in the Connecticut River, they emigrate to the Atlantic Ocean. There's no problem with having the Atlantic Ocean. A shark can take a lamprey, that's not a big deal. A 10-pound lake trout doesn't do so well with a lamprey on it. So lamprey have an environment where they belong and where they're not really a problem, and we're not against lamprey because they're lamprey. We're against lamprey where they're out of balance with host species in an environment where they don't belong. With fish population restoration, again, this is our goal. Again, our goal isn't just to control sea lamprey. We use sea lamprey as a tool in restoring the native fish population. So our overall goal is not just to kill sea lamprey, is to restore the native fish population in Lake Champlain. Also, the species assemblage, big fancy word, just meaning that Lake Champlain has a certain number of fish in it that make up the community. And if we have certain members of that community that are missing, things are going to be out of balance, they're going to take different turns, they're going to open up different niche spaces and allow organisms to thrive, which also shouldn't be there. And like any other invasive, lamprey have thrived in the absence of any other organism filling that niche. There weren't parasitic fish in Lake Champlain prior to sea lamprey. There aren't very many parasitic fish on the planet, period. So they were able to occupy a niche that wasn't previously occupied. Economic integrity, we don't minimize this. This is an important part of sea lamprey control and restoration of the fishery. Local businesses, we've estimated the fishery of Lake Champlain at over $200 million in value. That's not just the value of, let's say, having fish in the lake, but that includes all of these things: restaurants, hotels, bait and tackle shops, charter boats, gas stations, boat dealers, marine, I mean, you name it. There's a lot of things that attract people to the fishery, and each one of them are interconnected. Same way a food web is complex, so is an economic system. There's a lot of things that are all intertwined with the fishery of Lake Champlain. I just mentioned the value there. And then also, not to be underestimated, is the fact that it's cultural. I mean, we don't want to put this as a side issue. People enjoy fishing. It brings people together. There's value in that, and we recognize that and we support that. Not recognizing that people enjoy fishing and that it brings families together, it creates opportunities for recreation, that's an important value the Fish and Wildlife Service supports. And even more so in this area, Vermont, I'm not sure I have the latest numbers, maybe Brian might be able to tell me, but I know I've heard that Vermont has one of the highest per capita fishing license sales rates of any state in the nation. So this is a fishing state. And like I mentioned here before, this just goes with the idea of quality time. This is something that's worth preserving. Okay, so moving on to how do we do this? Some of what I said before was recycled from last year because guess what? Lamprey are 400 million years old. They haven't changed their life cycle recently. But the way we control them has changed recently. And this is an update to how we enact control of sea lamprey in Lake Champlain. And it's kind of a complicated, busy graph, and I'm not trying to have you understand or read every single thing on there, but maybe just demonstrate to you the complexity of all the different kinds of control that we put forth on Lake Champlain. You can see the red numbers are the years that we treat or control in different ways the lamprey in these rivers, and the black lines separate out these three quadrants. No, it's not a quadrant, is it? It's three. What is that? A tridrant? I don't know, whatever they call that. Triad. It used to be quadrants and I changed it. Anyway, so we've got these three zones. Let's go with zones. And within here, this is actually set up and designed with a purpose. One, from an administrative point of view, which isn't insignificant, this cuts down on travel and resources and things of that sort, which allows us to then put money towards things like chemical and other areas. So it reduces our administrative overall impact and lets us focus things on actually controlling sea lamprey. That's a good thing. From a biological perspective, we don't have proof yet, but there's a theory or a concept that's certainly plausible that by rotating the control this way, we're actually creating a cyclical year class cycle in the population. So at any given time, the ages of the larvae that I showed you before are at different stages at different parts of the lake, and that's creating a different amount of pheromone, which I'm not going to go a lot in today, but lamprey use pheromone. If you know what pheromone is, it's an odor, it's a scent. I use the word perfume for lack of a better term, that lamprey give off, and the larvae give it off, which then lets the adults know that, hey, guess what? We're already in here and they are successful. Spawning works here. Come on in and do some more. So it gives adults basically a verification or validation that it's worth spawning again at a certain river. I don't think they make a conscious decision to this point, but it's just programmed into their instinct. So they come back in and spawn in the same rivers where they know spawning has been successful in the past. Well, when that signal tends to be stronger in different areas of the lake, it almost starts creating this, we call it jokingly the whack-a-mole strategy. We're making the lamprey chase the signal around the lake, which starts to take the lamprey population, and this is, again, it's theory, it's concept, but we have some proof that it's true. And they'll start focusing their reproductive effort in different regions of the lake at different times. And then if we can focus the population's spawning effort in different areas, when we go into treat, we have a population that's at its maximum. We hit it with chemical treatment, we do the most damage on that population at that time, and it maximizes the effectiveness of control. So we're trying to basically set them up for the maximum kill. Yeah, put it nicely, but yeah. I mean, any tool we can use to maximize our control efforts, we're going to employ. And this is one that we're trying. This is relatively new that we've had this zone structure set up, so we don't have any data yet to prove that it has worked or validate that it's worked. We're excited to see that it may be working. We have some anecdotal things about trapping, and our adults who come back in the next year that we catch in some traps have shown numbers that are consistent with this maybe working, but it's too early to say for sure that it's working. Maybe just one last thing to add on here is you can see the different colors, and they all correspond to the different types of control that we're using in different areas. There's no one-size-fits-all approach for the best way to kill lamprey. It depends on the size of the river, the length of the river, the total volume of water in the river, actually which state it's in. I mean, Vermont and New York have different laws and regulations, so we do things differently depending on that. Maybe the overall point is that we do things in the most effective way we can, where we can, and when we can. And we're not locked into a one-size-fits-all approach in that respect. The lampricide treatment process. How do we actually do this treatment? I know probably most of you are familiar with the fact that we use chemicals to kill the larval sea lamprey. Those are the ones that spend the most time in the rivers. That's where we kill them. We have to, by state regulation, our state conditions and our permits, do toxicity tests. And this is no easy chore. We have to, first of all, gather over 300 larval lamprey, bring them to a lab, set them up into toxicity testing tanks. And you can see in this picture on the right, actually I think I can, there we go. These here are tanks that we put lamprey in, and up here is what's called a serial diluter. And over here is a standardized TFM solution. And it gets pumped up and diluted into a whole series of concentrations, and it tells us for every river that we treat how much chemical we have to use to be effective to kill sea lamprey. Because a lot of factors affect that. It's not a matter of go out, always add X number of milliliters of this chemical and you'll be successful. No, it's not that easy. The pH affects things, the alkalinity affects things, the temperature affects things. It's very complex. So we have to first of all establish, okay, for this date, this year, this river, how much chemical do we need? Once we establish that, then we go in, and our permit allows us, well, it depends on each river, but let's just say for argument's sake, we can treat at what's called 1.2 times MLC. What that means is it's 1.2 times the minimum lethal concentration to sea lamprey. So that toxicity test tells us, all right, it's going to take, let's say, 6 milligrams per liter of TFM to kill sea lamprey in the Winooski River. You're allowed to use 1.2 times 6, which would be, I don't know, 6.5, or I'm guessing something like that. So that's what we're allowed to use, just above what it takes to kill sea lamprey. What that does is it protects the other species. TFM is great at killing sea lamprey, and it won't kill other species, at least not most other species, as long as you don't go too high. If we just throw it in willy-nilly, yeah, we're going to kill everything in there. But we're very, very careful with how much TFM we add to the rivers, and that's important. And Fish and Wildlife Service takes that responsibility seriously. We're not out there just to run rampant all over the environment and kill things. We want to do the absolute minimum damage possible to the non-target environment with maximizing the amount of lamprey control. When we do these things, I think some people I've had asked me questions before think that we go out and we drive up with the truck with a couple of barrels to the bridge and we dump them over the edge and go home. I wish. It's not that easy. It probably takes 3 or 4 days just to set up for a treatment. And once we set up, it goes on for 12 to 14 hours. We show up probably at 4 a.m. and by 6, we start the pump going, and then it goes until 6 or 8 o'clock at night. And when we treat sea lamprey, it's not like they're taking a cyanide pill. We don't just give them one sniff and they die. They have to be exposed for 12 hours, or actually 9 hours, I'm sorry, a 12-hour treatment to ensure a 9-hour minimum lethal dose. So it's important that we keep this thing going for 9 hours. Any kind of poisoning is always a two-component process. It's a component of both exposure and concentration. So we have to not only get the amount we put in correct, we also have to get the time we expose them to correct. And those two things together are what make a successful lamprey treatment. When we do a treatment too, depending on the river, we do what's called boost stations. I have this in here as information because I get asked about it quite a bit. If we do a very short stretch, like our best example would be in New York, over in Westport at Mill Brook. There's a boat marine over there. And Mill Brook is probably 100 yards from where we put in the chemical to the lake. So in that amount of length, we can barely even measure the mixing of the chemical before it's in the lake. It's a very short treatment. If we go to the Great Chazy River in New York, we start putting in chemical at Moores. 17 miles later, it comes out in Lake Champlain. Well, like anything else, it's going to dilute on its way down, and it also does what we call attenuate, which just means kind of lose its potency. The actual chemical stretches out over the course of that length. So we have to set up stations along the way to keep on bringing that concentration back up to where we know it needs to be. So a treatment can be something as easy as a little small thing that's an aquarium pump sitting on the shoreline and putting it in for 12 hours at Mill Brook in New York, or it can be 35 people in the Great Chazy River sitting at different boost stations, constantly adding chemical and maintaining and measuring and monitoring that block as it moves from Moores down through Champlain all the way down to the lake itself. So what does it look like when we actually do a treatment? Well, I got this neat video here. This is the Saranac River just below Imperial Dam. And we treated this in 2013, 14? I can't remember which one, it doesn't really matter. Anyway, this is what it looks like. So you can see here, the chemical is on the shoreline, and there's a big pump in there. We're not pumping chemical itself straight in there out of the can. The chemical is first mixed in a container on the shore with another water pump. The majority of what's going through that pump is water, and then a very small portion of that is the chemical. It looks yellow, which it is, and that lets us know there's chemical in there. However, people think we're just shooting straight chemical in there, and it's not. It's a very, very small concentration. And we're talking something along the lines of, well, I guess it's 2 or 3% of the water volume going in is actually chemical. However, it's a concentrated chemical, so it definitely is visible. And as it goes in there, immediately, it's not mixed. You can kind of see the little cloud of chemicals that comes out. It takes a good several hundred yards. Well, it varies based on the river, the size of the river. But it takes a while for this to mix and get in there and get an equal concentration. So we've got teams of technicians, both working with the state and our agency, who measure these things and monitor them downstream, and we keep track of how much chemical is going in there. And that's important. We want to make sure that we're adding the right amount and that it's staying high enough to kill sea lamprey, but not going too high where it's going to injure other fish species or any other species. And then that's how we treat a river, what it looks like. We also have treatments on deltas. And when I say delta, I just basically mean a portion of the lake outside of a large river where we've found sea lamprey. And we go out with our assessment crews, and we've got a big pontoon boat. I know a few of you have met us out there and said, what are you guys doing? And we've got what looks like a gold mine dredge that goes off this pontoon boat. We drop it down on the bottom of the lake like a vacuum cleaner. We pump electricity through it to irritate the lamprey to get them to come out of their burrows. And then we suck them up through a giant hose to the surface again and say, are there lamprey there, yes or no? And that's how we find and detect sea lamprey presence on some of these deltas. From that work, we found them on the Salmon River Delta, right in Plattsburgh, or South Plattsburgh, by the airport. We found them in the Saranac Delta, which is the second biggest delta. A lot of lamprey right off Plattsburgh and Saranac River. The biggest delta is the Ausable. The Ausable complex, there are, I can't even tell you how many lamprey, well, we don't know, just a bunch off off the Ausable Delta. And then down in the Boquete in Willsboro, we also have a delta down there with lamprey on it. So these deltas house quite a few lamprey as well. We can treat all the rivers in the basin and do a fantastic job, but if we leave the deltas untouched, we might as well not be trying. There's a lot of lamprey in the deltas and they need to be addressed as well. Just for the Vermont folks here to know, thank goodness the geology of Vermont is different enough from New York that there's enough slow water in the rivers of Vermont before it gets to the lake that the lamprey all tend to drop out and stay in the rivers. If we had lamprey on the Winooski Delta or the Lamoille Delta or things like that, we'd have a heck of a mess on our hands. But we've checked somewhat and poked around and it doesn't seem to be the case. So we're fortunate that it's just the Adirondack rivers where it's pretty much a giant chute over the rocks right down to the lake and then boom, it gets them all flushed out onto the deltas. That's why they're in New York and not in Vermont. So what we decided to do is we used to have, well, actually it's kind of a funny story. So back in the olden days, before I even had a job here, they had crop dusters, they had airplanes full of pesticide, and they would fly paths across the deltas, and they'd drop their load onto the deltas. And there's Brian. Is Brian still here? There's Brian. Brian was here in those days. I say olden days, that dates Brian. he was here for this. And, yeah, back in the 90s. So, from what I've been told, Brian can attest to this, you would have some poor soul on a boat out in the lake who would have basically the runway operator job with like orange flags saying, over here, over here, over there. And the plane would come in, and every time the plane would just coat the person in pesticide as they were wearing a full suit to protect themselves. Terrible idea. This is not the way to use pesticide. But at the time, it was actually the cheapest way to do it, and it was quick and effective, and it didn't cost that much money to apply it that way. From a effectiveness standpoint, it wasn't very effective, we don't think, because it was inaccurate. And on top of that, it was dangerous. We don't want people being hit by flying pesticide. That's just not a good idea. So we moved on. The next iteration in delta treatments was to get a pontoon boat and stick a salt spreader on the back. Thing you use to lay salt down the parking lots. So, well, the balicide we use looks just like fertilizer. It's like salt, good enough. We'll just stick it in the back of a salt spreader on the back of a pontoon boat, and we'll just do laps back and forth across the delta and spread it out using this. And it worked. It was okay, but it also was somewhat inaccurate, and it was tough trying to drive lines, because anybody who's trying to drive a boat on a straight line knows it's almost impossible. I don't care how good you are. Wind blows, the water moves, all kinds of things happen. When you're laying down a precise path of pesticide in a straight line, you're going to constantly be missing what you're trying to hit. So that didn't work so well either. Eventually, we went to Senator Leahy's office and said, help. The Great Lakes have this cool new boat, and we want one too. So Senator Leahy said, okay, I probably can make that work. And fortunately, we were able to get this thing. Okay, let me open this up. Whoops, oh, what happened there? Sorry. All right, I'll try this again. Or we'll just go back and open it one more time. Tell you what, we'll do that. Here we go. Okay, so this is the boat we got, and the Echo Center, Lake Champlain, filmed this for us. And to tell you the truth, I was going through some things looking for another video, and I found this. I didn't know it was even on YouTube. It's like, wow, that's very good. So this is our boat we got back in 2012. And this is Steve Smith, who's part of the program. He's our head control biologist. He's in charge of putting the chemical down on the rivers and on the deltas. And he's setting up this fancy new boat we have right now and showing how it works. And it's no easy thing. It's a 26-foot Carolina skiff, and it's got a giant hopper that we fill up with pesticide right in the center of it. So Steve's setting it up now. Now he's going to go back. He's going to turn on the sprayer, and you'll see that in the back. All right, because that would be the hopper. So this would be like turning on the chemical right now, letting it go into the system. Then it feeds into the hoses, and you'll see those sprayers back there. Those sprayers are all calibrated to lay down the chemical, and it's really amazing how these things work. It's got a 30-foot swath, and I'm going to show you another video here in a second that really demonstrates the point. Okay. that up. And here's the actual thing in use. Okay, so this is even Tony's cameo. I think Tony's in this video here. Tony's in the back. So this is the boat on the Saranac Delta in operation. It's got chemical on it, and it's actively applying it. The great thing about this is not only can we just drive the boat with this nice wide boom sprayer on it, getting a wide path and cover more territory at one time, on board is something, we call it the Star Wars computer. If you remember episode 4, when they're flying down the Death Star, the targeting computer, they're trying to drop the photon, no, it's the Star Trek, what are they, whatever they are. Yeah, somebody's, yeah, I need a Star Wars nerd, whatever they drop down the exhaust chute. It goes down in the computer, you follow the computer, it tells you where you are on course, and you're able to then go through and just follow this path, computer guided, letting you know what you've already covered, what you haven't covered, and it even turns on and turns off the water jets so that you're not over applying or under applying. It's self-calibrating. Even the speed of the boat, like Steve can go 14 miles an hour and it'll turn the application rate up to whatever it needs to be. If he slows down, it'll slow down the application rate. So the whole thing's calibrated. And it was designed by a company in Indiana who's fantastic. They took the technology that farmers use out in the Midwest for applying fertilizer and pesticides to their crops on these giant tractors. They already have this. This isn't new technology, but no one's ever needed it for the lake. I mean, who puts chemical on lake but the Fish and Wildlife Service, right? So they took this stuff and got it all set up, and they took this technology from agriculture and applied it to a boat, and were able to get it all set up, and it's just been an amazing time saving. I think Brian could attest to the fact that in the past, a Delta treatment would probably involve 20 or 30 people, and it would take us 2 days to accomplish one of these things. Now we can do it with about 6 or 8 people and get it done in half a day. So it's a huge time savings. It's not only money savings, it's also, it's more accurate. We do a better job of it.
Brad, how far into the lake and how deep the deltas have you found them?
That's a good question.
How far will they go?
Well, the best example would be on the Ausable Delta. There's a giant drop-off and shelf. I'm talking like cliff, and it goes from it goes from about 18 feet to about 90 feet in a matter of 20 lateral feet. So it's a quick drop-off. Well, Tony's been out there sampling this, and we found him on the shore. We found him halfway out on the delta. We found him at the edge of that cliff, and we said, oh, well, they can't be out there any farther. We won't worry about that. And I said, well, I'll tell you what, why don't you go buy 90 feet of hose and just humor me and see what happens. So we bought 90 feet of hose to humor me, and I wasn't very amused. They were down 90 feet deep. So they've gone off the edge, down this giant slope, and we found them way down deep. Now that being said, it doesn't mean they're all over the bottom of Lake Champlain. No, that's not what it means. What it means is lamprey, like anything else, same way salmon do, follow the food. So as long as there's food there, you're going to find lamprey there. And on the edge of that shelf, guess what? It's a great sorting area where sediment, fine particulates, organic matter, the food that larval lamprey feed on collects. You're going to find lamprey there. And whenever we do a drop, we call it a drop, we do a vacuum on the bottom looking for lamprey. If we get all clean sand, we never find a lamprey. Just, it's understood. If we ever go down there, and Tony can verify this, if you start sucking up and all of a sudden you see what we call black gold, like detritus and organic matter and all kinds of leaf matter, if that comes up first, you're almost guaranteed to see a larval lamprey afterward, because you know the food source is there, and they hang out and they congregate around the food that they feed on, which at that life stage isn't fish, it's organic matter, and really fine particulate stuff. So when there's that kind of material available on that shelf and that drop-off, you'll find sea lamprey there. When it's just sand or bare bottom, you're not going to find sea lamprey there. So that was a long answer to a short question, meaning that we'll find sea lamprey wherever there's food for sea lamprey. They'll congregate around the areas where it's most prevalent, but when it's a delta, that means wherever the river has tended to deposit that nutritious material that larval lamprey feed on. Yeah?
Has there ever been a study of what was the natural holding amount of lamprey before we lost lake trout, before we lost salmon?
I'm not sure I understand your question. You mean,
What would have been the natural, holding amount of lamprey in the lake?
you mean the carrying capacity? Like how? Well,
Were they here?
well, I guess kind of the question is, I mean, we are not even positive that they were here prior to 1920s. So by that time, we didn't have any lake trout or salmon either. So we put lake trout and salmon back in the lake when lamprey were maybe just around the outskirts feeding on, I don't know, pike or bass or who knows what, at a very low rate. As soon as we decided to reintroduce lake trout and Atlantic salmon, bingo, the preferred host species showed up, and then they had a smorgasbord of host species to feed on.
Well, I guess that was my question, was when we had natural lake trout and natural Atlantic salmon, were there amounts of lamprey in Champlain?
No, there weren't. I mean, well, I could have an argument with some people. It's my belief, and the belief of most people who study sea lamprey, that sea lamprey were invasive to the lake in the early part of the century, and by that point there were no native lake trout or Atlantic salmon in the lake. They were extinct by the mid-1850s, or mid-1800s. So prior to that, I mean, there weren't any lamprey, so lake trout and salmon were doing great without any lamprey. Then they went extinct, lamprey came in and kind of stayed at a low level for a little while. We put salmonids back in the lake, and lamprey took off at higher levels again. Okay. There we go. Okay, so I mentioned control. We use the chemicals. That's what we're probably most known for, or in some circles, most infamous for. The other thing we do, though, is barriers. And we have barriers around the basin, too. So we use chemical to kill the larvae once they've had reproduction be successful, and we've been unable to stop that. If we can, we like to prevent reproduction from happening at all. And we can do this in small rivers, but we certainly can't do this in the Winooski. You can't put a temporary barrier in a gigantic river. You can put it into a smaller river, excuse me, and be able to affect control that way. And just an example of a few different rivers here where we have done that, kind of the range of barriers. So in the top right corner, you can see what we call a temporary barrier. That's just some chicken fence along with some black plastic bird screen and some basic fence post stakes pounded into the river. And then in the middle is actually, let me cursor on that to show you. Right there is the lamprey trap. So the lamprey come up and bang into that fence, can't get up, and eventually they find a hole there, just a glorified minnow trap, and they go inside the trap. And we pull those out, and that's how we collect sea lamprey in rivers of that size. We took that to the next level and built these things, which are what we call engineered traps. Same idea as the other trap, but instead of being fence posts, which blow out during floods and have to be reset constantly, these things stay in and are a lot more durable and a lot more dependable. So that's Beaver Brook in New York, near Westport. And then the big kahuna of the thing here is what we call, this is the Morpion barrier. This is in Quebec. For a long time, we were unable to do any kind of control in Quebec, and this was a big success, being able to put this barrier in Quebec. This is a giant, all aluminum barrier. If you can see the size of it, I don't know if you can tell, there's, where's my cursor? There it is. That's a person right there. So that's a guy down the bottom, so you can see a person in relation to how big this thing is. So it's a big barrier, and this thing blocks lamprey from migrating up the Morpion stream in Quebec, which is undeniably the largest spawning area in larval production of any Canadian tributary. So that was a big deal, being able to block their migration and spawning in there. And just to show you what they actually look like, here's that same Morpion barrier. There's a catch from one day. You can see all the lamprey in the bottom of the trap that was in there. So these things do work. They're effective. We catch lots of lamprey. You can see there's also other fish in there. They're not species selective. Whatever's migrating up, we're going to catch. But it gives us the ability to cull out and cut off the heads of the lamprey on spot and kill them. And then anything that's not a lamprey, we take out and lift above the barrier and let it go on its way. So I just want to kind of put forth that barriers are an important part of the program in addition to chemicals, and both are important. Chemicals we have to use where barriers are just not feasible, and if we could put barriers everywhere, we would, but we just can't. That's just not realistic. In smaller rivers like this, we can use barriers, And instead of having to put chemical in the environment, it's great to be able to use this technique instead. Aside, I mean, I'm not just trying to be downplaying chemical. I've got no problem using chemical when it's justified, but chemical is expensive too. That stuff is not cheap. So a barrier is much cheaper than using chemical. We don't use chemical because it's quick and easy. We use chemical because we have to. It's much more expensive, but as our only resort, we do use it.
Now, those barriers only used during certain times of the year?
Yeah, good question. So a lamprey only spawn from pretty much late March until early June. That's their spawning season. So that barrier I showed there in Quebec, it's actually, I don't know if you noticed, here I'm going to go back and show you it actually. Yeah, you can see that big crane, or maybe you can't. There's a yellow beam there. The crane's off screen. But we lift that thing in and out every spring and summer. So in April, we come in, or late March, depending on how the water is, and we lift all of those pieces of the barrier into place and set them in there. It's not easy, and it's cold. So we get those in there, and then we block the lamprey during their migration period, which I mentioned is like late March until June. Once they're done, well, there's no need for it anymore. So we return the river to its natural flowing state. Same way in the top, all that screen we yank out, so it's only there during spawning season. And you can see the panels in the upper left corner, that's only there during spawning season too. That can be removed. So the rivers are returned to their free-flowing state when lamprey aren't spawning. Good question. Things that are successes and benefits, kind of wanted to update you on what's going on and how we're doing with all of these things. One is continued improvements for native species. Last year, the state came out with their report on lake sturgeon and their management plan for the species, which is a Vermont threatened species. Or actually, no, it's endangered. I'm sorry, endangered species. So I used to have a picture of a sturgeon, which I couldn't find, where it looked like it had measles. There were so many lamprey wounds on a sturgeon, it was like a pincushion for sea lamprey. Look at this one here. I can't find a mark on that sturgeon anywhere from a sea lamprey. That's a huge change, and that's because of sea lamprey control. And the state biologist had put right in their report, one of the most important parts to lake sturgeon restoration is sea lamprey control. So it's not just about trout and salmon, it's about other species in the lake as well. Another success we had was the first treatment of the La Platte River. Last time I was here, I was talking about, we had done it and we didn't know what was really going to happen yet. We had to go through and check. Turns out that we were over 96% effective. Tony, you remember the number?
That's about right.
It was high 90s. I mean, it's about as good as it gets for lamprey control. So where we applied chemical in the Platte River, it was a great success. And to be honest, even we were surprised how many lamprey were in there. We had surveyed it and we thought we knew what was in there, and we did to some degree. But after we treated it, we found more lamprey than even we expected to see in there. So that was time well spent, and even though it was a hot potato politically and required a lot of permitting hoops to jump through, it was worth the effort to get that river treated and get that population under control. And as one that had never been treated before, having finally accomplished that made a big difference, we believe, in the overall production of lamprey in the lake. So some things we just do a better job of that we've been doing for years and years and years and years. This is one where we actually added something brand new to the program. So this is on top of what was already being done. So it should start adding some more benefit to the program.
How far upstream did you treat in the La Platte?
Yep, we started right at the bridge, basically, the Falls Road.
Falls Road Ridge, yep.
Yep.
Near our house.
So
Yep.
big rock ledge there, goes down. There are lamprey above there, and tell you what, I'll get to that in a second. We have a plan for that as well. I'll talk about that in a minute. Morphing on barrier, I just showed in the previous slide. This is in Quebec. This has been a great success, even better than we expected. I had my guys go in now that we have it in place, and I said, I want you to check above there and find out how is the population of larvae doing up there. If it's not changing at all, well, then we're not having any impact. Something's wrong. But thank goodness, BJ Allaire, who's our chief of larval assessment, has gone in there every year since we put the barrier in and documented the population of larvae by doing standard assessments and surveys, and he's shown pretty much an expected decline in the larval population. So these things take 4 years, I mentioned, so you can imagine every year one more batch of lamprey exits the river, which we can't do anything about, unfortunately, but it just happens. But the good news is there's no more new ones coming in replacing them. So after 4 years of this thing being in place, we should have almost all of the lamprey that are larvae in there matured and exited, and then there won't be any more replacements for them. So we're watching that number steadily go down over time as each successive year class exits the river and a new one is not coming in to replace it, and that's a good thing. Other successes are streamlining the permit process. I'm not sure what I'm going to do this year. We've got treatments coming up in Vermont, and I have no permits to write. We've actually changed things in Vermont, so we don't have to write permits every time we do a treatment. We have multi-year permits and multi-stream permits, and it just makes life easier for both our agency and for the state. And it was a great partnership in being able to figure out a solution to make sure we continue to maintain thorough oversight and control of activities happening in the rivers, but at the same time reducing the administrative burden on both agencies in making sure that happens. And then technological advances. There's a lot of these things. I'm going to mention a couple in the next slide, but a couple that I don't have on there that I thought about on my way up today was we're looking at sticking in a whole bunch of special grout into the Great Chazy Dam. Believe it or not, there's an underground cavern fissure under the Chazy Dam, and sure enough, Lamprey found it, and they go under the dam. So we got a dam to block them. Well, they said, oh, really? Thanks, we'll go under instead. So we've got a way now to hopefully block them from going under the dam. It's not as easy as it sounds. You don't just stick a gate on there. You don't just pour in concrete. It's pretty difficult. But we figured out a solution, we think, with some hydrologists and engineers to fix the dam so that it actually works like a dam. And the Great Chazy, I mentioned before, is a 17-mile-long treatment. That's a lot of lamprey. And in the past, the Great Chazy has had the single largest population of lamprey of any river in Lake Champlain. So if we can cut off what would be 2/3 of the population of lamprey in that river, that should make a difference in the lake, whether we're successful treating or not. Here's a big take-home graph. Oh shoot, my ears are cut off on the bottom. Well, tell you what, the beginning is 2003 and the end is 2017. You can count in between. So on the right side is our most recent wounding data. And of course, the first thing you're going to say is, holy cow, why is lake trout up so high? And that's what I said too. And the answer is, we don't really know. The way to look at this though is to be careful and not assume that this means the numbers of lamprey are way up. That's not necessarily what it means. If you look at the number of salmon wounding numbers on there, they haven't really changed appreciably. So they're about the same. So why is the lake trout number so much higher? Again, the answer is we don't know for sure. And I have a meeting scheduled with Brian next week where we're going to pull out all the data and start sifting through it and try to figure out what's causing this. There's a reason this is happening. Even more interesting is if you look at this closely, you'll see there's almost a predictable 4-year pattern that happens here. It's almost uncanny. This doesn't happen in biology. Nothing follows patterns. It's always erratic and unpredictable. This is way too regular to be something that's just random. So something's going on and we're not sure what it is, but we have enough data and information that we think we could spend some time sifting through it and analyzing it and looking at things we may have missed in the past or not paid attention to, and perhaps figure out what this means. And best case scenario, it's an aha moment and we learn something about the lamprey population that we didn't previously understand, and it may allow us to control them even better. I guess the main take-home point is, yes, the wounding rate for lake trout is way up to 60. That doesn't mean that the lamprey population increased by twice or anything like that, because you see on salmon, it's really the same thing it has been for the last 10 years. You could read into that the number of lake trout went way down, and therefore the number of lamprey per lake trout went up. Possible. I don't think so. I think Brian's data says that's not the case. There could be other things. It could be the way we sample, when we sample, where we sample. There's all kinds of variables. I just want you to understand that just because the lake trout number went up doesn't mean the lamprey all went up. I think maybe the better way to gauge the lamprey population is to actually talk to you guys and find out what people have seen. And I've heard different stories and anecdotes, but most people tell me, yeah, I don't like lamprey, and yeah, I wish there were fewer of them, but to be honest, it's better than it has been in a long time. That's usually what I hear from people. So I'd like to hear that. That's great. That means I'm doing an okay job at least, but we can always do better. And we're continuing to increase things and improve things. The more I hear, the more it helps me. I put out a post on the forum last year, And I was ignoring people. I haven't responded yet, believe it or not. I've got so much information and things were changing. After I got this data back this year, I'm going to go back in and respond and kind of summarize all the responses I got and put some information on there so I can follow up on that point. New directions, things that we're doing to improve the program. I tell my guys that their job is to go out and kill lamprey, find lamprey and kill lamprey. And my job is to sit in the office and, I guess, number one, sign paperwork, but number two, think up new ideas. And I think Tony will probably smile, and every couple of months he's like, oh crap, now what do you want me to do? And I've got some new harebrained scheme that I read somewhere or heard about and say, Tony, why don't you go try this? And he says, I'm too busy to do that. I said, I know, just again, humor me, give us a try. So we're always trying to push the envelope and try new things. We want to get new technologies, new developments, new ideas, new anything. We're not satisfied. I don't want to say, you know what, winning rate's about 10 or 12 for salmon, that's good enough. We're just going to put on autopilot and coast. There's no reason to worry about going any further. Oh, you know what, actually the guy with the rod in the back there, sir, with the rod back there, the big carbon rod, perfect timing. I was just going to use that for a prop to show somebody something. It was almost like it was planned. Thank you. Yep. So we're always looking for new technologies and new ways to do things. I don't want to just rest on the fact that it's going okay. Okay is not good enough. We want to do better. So this top picture here on the left is the resistance board weir that we're building at Mallett's Creek, and this is in Colchester, and we're using these things. This is a carbon fiber rod. Quite honestly, you want to pull that, what does it remind you of if you just, exactly, it's like a fishing pole. This is like a fishing rod blank, more or less. Not exactly, but pretty close. Well, we just spent $12,000 on, I don't know how, 8,000 of these things, and you can see in the picture there, they're all set up in an array to make panels, or a grate, if you will. And we're going to string them from bank to bank in Mallett's Creek. And these things are light enough that they float, they're buoyant. We also have all kinds of other technology on them. We've got a special kind of plastic that floats. This thing lays in the water at an angle, and it just kind of bounces in the current. Part of it's out of the water, so the lamprey can't get over it. We don't want them jumping over the tip of this thing. Then the bottom of it is hinged on the bottom of the river, so they can't get past it that way. In the past, on Mallett's Creek, we had a screen barrier, and Mallett's Creek is not a little creek. It blows out regularly. And as soon as the water comes up, it falls down and the lamprey get on by. And all of our efforts are lost. It's a waste of time. I don't know how many years we've been trapping there. It's become almost just like an article of faith. We don't do it because it works. We do it because, oh well, we've always done it. So finally I said, no, that's not what we're going to do. We're going to make this work or we're not going to do it at all. So we're looking at this new method now. Out west, they use these kind of barriers called resistance board weirs. Can't say it. Resistance board weirs to collect salmon. Now they use 1.5-inch PVC pipes because guess what? Salmon are a lot bigger than lamprey. Well, we've tried to be innovative and come up with this for a material, and Tony and I spent I don't know how many months researching aluminum tube, wood dowel, every kind of plastic known to man. Do you know how many kinds of synthetic materials exist? I have no clue. There must be 300 kinds of plastic on the market. We looked at all of them. But we came up with this as being the most economical and effective way to design this kind of new weir. And we're hoping that what happens is this thing just floats, or the end of it floats in the water. If the water comes up and it's flowing too fast, it just falls down and lets the water go right over top, and it's no problem. We can just sit at home and say, oh, no problem, water's up. Then as soon as the water goes down, it pops back up again, and it becomes a barrier. So it more or less, instead of fighting against the current, it works with the current. And it's always better to work with Mother Nature than against her, because she always wins. So this is a new technology we're trying out, and we're hoping that this ends up being effective in Mallett's Creek. And if it does, we hope to make some more of these things, perhaps, and use them in other rivers as well. So just one of the ways that we're working to come up with new technologies and new ideas to be more effective at preventing lamprey from spawning and making new lamprey. Another thing, as I mentioned, the La Platte barrier. Jill asked me before where we were treating in the La Platte. You can see in the bottom left corner, that's the bridge on Falls Road, and we're standing under it. And right where we're standing is potentially, hopefully if we're lucky, where we're going to put in a new little mini lip or barrier. It doesn't have to be very big, not a dam, just kind of a little barrier. because at that spot, along that big rock slide, that shelf, there's no pool. Lamprey don't have anywhere to stage and jump and get up and over it. They're already attached and sucking on and inching their way up to get further up. So it has to be a very small barrier to prevent lamprey from getting any further upstream. And Brian has told me the state has no interest in managing any migration of any other species getting up over there. Steelhead don't go up over that part of the river anyway. So we can more or less put a blockade to lamprey, which are trying to get up there, without affecting anything else. And that's how we plan to control sea lamprey upstream of that point. We'll still need to put chemical in below there, but that cuts off 2/3 of the length of the Platte where lamprey have been found. That's a good thing. And then lastly, this bottom right corner is Pond Brook, very small little trib, which flows into Mallett's Creek, just down in Colchester, right behind Elm Hill Farm. And right back there, you can see it's only about, 8 feet across for the whole river. And during the summertime, you can almost step across it. It's that small. However, we've caught hundreds of spawning adult lamprey in there, and they use it. So we were able, in this case, to build a wood crib structure. Actually, give a lot of credit to Tony back there. He engineered and led this project, and it's fantastic. We now have a frame that we can put solid structures into and block lamprey from getting by. And again, just one more way we're being more effective at controlling lamprey. So with that, I guess any more questions you might have about the program and where we are, or anything else we're trying new, or any comments you have? Yes?
Are lamprey good for anything?
If I had a nickel, well, I mentioned, guess what, they use them for spinal cord research, so I guess I could say yes. Other than that, I mean, ecologically, as a parasite, I mean, you could say every parasite is detrimental to the entire system because it feeds off of another member of the ecosystem. However, we can also say that every organism serves a role or a niche or fills it, and by taking it out, it's going to change things. That said, that's true in the Atlantic Ocean where they're native. Lake Champlain, they're invasive. They're not really good for much in Lake Champlain because they're a overall tax on the system. They're a net negative effect. If we let lamprey go without any control, unchecked, we might as well just shut down the hatcheries and stop stocking fish because there would be no point to it. And we'd be eating out of house and home with sea lamprey.
The queen eats them, doesn't she?
No, I wish. Yes?
Have you given up on the trapping and using their pheromones?
No, not entirely. We're still looking at using pheromones. They're still in the experimental phase in the Great Lakes looking at this. Pheromones is a weird kind of thing. It works. It's a phenomena that definitely is measurable and we know it happens. But as far as using it in a management strategy and, putting it in as an attractant to get things to come into an area, it doesn't work as well as we would hope. It does work, but is it better than what we currently have? No, not so much.
They're not using any poison or anything.
Yeah, that's true.
And trying to manufacture some, I know probably would be expensive, but just like drugs and anything else.
Yeah.
But look how they managed the beetles and the yellow jackets by using pheromones. They'll come for miles to go into the trap.
And it's true. And I mean,
Something with that, then actually individual people could put traps out in places and.
have made it into little creeks and things, yeah. Like what we actually, our current thinking on pheromones is they're not going to make a bad trap good, but they may make a good trap better.
Yeah.
So we might be able to use pheromones as an additive to existing control mechanisms and make things slightly better than they currently are. So if we're already getting lamprey coming into a trap and trapping them, that's okay. Pheromone might increase it by 10% or 20%, which, hey, that's more than we had before, so it's worth giving it a try. So, good question. Back, yep.
Citizen science is becoming more and more prevalent at the data collection pool. And you mentioned that anecdotal data from folks like we have here is pretty important to seeing how the fish are doing as far as lamprey wounds go. Does the state consider doing something like eBird where citizens can enter information on the fish they catch and give it to you folks so you can kind of get a better understanding of a larger sample size of how the lamprey are affecting the population?
Yeah, we have thought about that, and I know the Great Lakes have had for a long time a thing called lamprey hunters or lamprey, I think it's basically like a bounty. They even used to pay people to bring in lamprey. And they told me about that. I said, oh no, I don't have enough money for all lamprey in Lake Champlain. That's not going to work. But it's a good question though. So I think there's an opportunity there. we've talked about it, and to be blatantly honest, we just haven't really pursued it. Not because we don't believe in it, it's just one more thing we don't have enough time to work on. That being said, it's something I'd be interested perhaps in exploring and looking into. So I think there's a possibility to put some of that to use in the future. Yes?
Do they have a preferred water temperature? Do you think that's why they're more on lake trout than walleyes or any other? The warmer, the bass,
Yeah.
salmon, lakers?
Yeah, it's a good question. The answer is yes, they do have a preferred temperature. Like anything else, it's complicated. It depends on what time of the year and where the fish are at that time of year, where they are at that time of year. Lamprey only hang out, if you will, in the deeper part of the lake. You don't find lamprey cruising the sandbar. They're just not up there. They're out in the deep water. And that's typically where you find lake trout and salmon. You don't get lamprey on northern pike very much because they're in the shallows. They are on them, but it's less frequent. So definitely temperature plays a role. Lamprey like colder water. Lamprey do not like warm
So is
water.
that why they're on lake trout more than salmon?
It's possible, I'll put it that way. I can't prove that. We do find them more on lake trout, obviously, as the numbers show here. It could be, maybe not temperature, it could be that lake trout are slower on the bottom. They just don't respond well. Salmon tend to just, anybody knows salmon, they take off faster.
Yep.
Lake trout are more slow and lumbering. So lake trout may be like, oh, is that a lamprey? Oh crap, I got hit. Whereas the salmon's like, lamprey, I'm out of here.
So Lake Ontario, when we catch them over there, they're about this big, that big around, and we get kings in the fall, they shake them off, they're coming out of the water,
Yes.
they fall off. So is that the
Exactly.
temperature, or is that just because the salmon's getting them off?
I don't know. I can't tell you for sure. It's probably a little bit of both.
Okay,
Yeah.
I just wanted to mention to you that, don't tell Ellen Marsden that you told us where those Lakers were. She held out from us for many years.
Oh, really?
Yeah. she
Oh,
never
well,
told
she
us.
put it on, actually, you go to
Yeah,
YouTube, it's
but-
on YouTube now, and it says where they are.
Oh, okay, so she changed it.
Yeah.
Years ago, she,
Although from what I've been told too, is, that was November on the reef there, and you can catch them, but when they're actually engaged in spawning, they ain't so big on hitting lures.
yeah.
So, maybe afterward though, they're getting ready and getting after, yeah. But, they're there for a short time, and there's other spots in the lake too, which I won't give up, that I know where they are. But yeah, I'll leave it to Ellen for secrets.
Yeah.
How's your
Yes.
funding stability?
Right now, it's actually quite well. Most of our funding for sea lamprey control Lake Champlain comes through allocations from the Great Lakes Fishery Commission, which is the overarching agency which controls sea lamprey on the Great Lakes, and their budget's way bigger than ours for obvious reasons. Senator Leahy has been great for the program in that he sits on a committee that funds the Great Lakes Fishery Commission, and as a stipulation of giving them money, he also dedicates funds for Lake Champlain. So it's through his direction and leadership that we get funds to control sea lamprey on Lake Champlain. So under his tenure in office, we've done quite well, and he's still there, so we're doing well. Yes?
Do you know what year or when lamprey were initially documented as being in Lake Champlain?
Well, it depends who you ask. I'll give both sides of the story. Some people are firm adherents to the fact that they've been here ever since the Champlain Sea receded 10,000 years ago.
I don't buy that.
Okay. Yeah, it's just people.
Hard to prove otherwise.
And actually, genetics, it isn't just a wild opinion. Actually, some genetics data have suggested that, and they're not crazy. There's some argument over whether it's correct assumptions or not. I'll say it's possible. I think the weight of evidence leans more in favor of the fact that the first time documented sea lamprey were observed and recorded and preserved was after the construction of the Champlain Canal connecting the Hudson River to Whitehall and getting that connection in there. And
During the biological survey in 1929, when they were first positively identified.
yes, positively, that's a good word, it's positively
In
identified.
Champlain?
In Champlain, yes. There was an anecdotal observation in 1856, which for a long time stood as well, they were here in 1856, it must have been. Well, since then, they actually found that organism was preserved and saved in a museum in Cornell, and it's been there since 1856, because Cornell's an old school, and it was in the basement of their fish lab. Well, somebody finally says, has anybody ever looked at that lamprey? And it was just, again, an article of faith. Everybody said, well, says in the literature it's a sea lamprey, it must be a sea lamprey.
And it was only a larva too.
Yeah, right, along with larvae as well. Well, finally, a esteemed biologist from Michigan said, let's go look at this larvae, or this lamprey. We got it saved in a museum, let's go look at it. And he looked at it, he said, that's not a sea lamprey, that's a silver lamprey. So it was misidentified. I don't think poorly of the guy who found it, because in 1856, there was probably only 10 fish biologists in all of eastern United States, and they certainly were lamprey biologists. So he saw something that looked like a lamprey, and he called it a sea lamprey. It's the best he could do. So unfortunately, it was a silver lamprey, which is native and not a problem in Lake Champlain. They are in balance with the native environment, so that's not a problem. Sea lamprey, like Brian just said, first time they were positively identified and authoritatively identified was 1929 in the Osable River by New York State DEC. So to me, my belief, and also because of just the fact that nobody had written about or mentioned a sea lamprey prior to that, you would think that people would notice thousands of sea lamprey hanging out in a river with salmon and everything else, and nobody ever mentioned one, or a wound even for that matter, in any of the old colonial pre-modern writings about lamprey being here. You would have thought you would have seen some evidence of that. But as soon as they showed up in 1929, they were documented. Following that, there were all kinds of reports, and they were everywhere. So we call it the genetic versus a demographic argument. And I tend to follow the demographic argument, which to me seems more credible than that they're invasive and they came in through the Champlain Ship Canal, not as a remnant population from the post-glaciation event. So my opinion, I don't claim to be 100% right, but to me, that's what the evidence suggests most likely happened. Yes?
Where is the most successful control lake or whatever as far as lamprey go? Like, you know, the most successful story as to eliminating them?
Us. Well,
Good answer.
yeah, well, okay, I mean, truthfully, in some ways it's true. As far as what the population was, there was a time, I could go back here, let me do that. Where's my, oops, went too far back. There, if you look at this graph here, look back at 2006. We had 100 lamprey per 100 lake trout in 2006. No one's ever recorded that in the Great Lakes or in the Finger Lakes where lamprey are found. We held the title for the most lamprey. Kind of a dubious distinction, but that was true. Since then, look where we've come. So as far as magnitude of change, we hold the record on that. I'm not sure it's a fair comparison because they never had that many anywhere else. But we've done a great job in that respect. In the Great Lakes, they had it as high as the 20s, and then eventually it went down to 3 or 4 lamprey per 100 fish in the Great Lakes. We believe that's unattainable for us. It's a different lake. Lake Huron is 1,000 times bigger than Lake Champlain. So we just don't have the ability to get numbers that low. It's too vast of a lake to compare to. There's more lamprey in a smaller area, so they're going to have a much higher likelihood of finding host species in this lake than there. As far as success goes, I don't know, I was kind of joking. I mean, I'm not sure I can compare who's the best at it, but maybe the best answer is we all use the same techniques and we get together and we share information, and it's not a competition. I mean, we're all trying to achieve the same thing. So as soon as one of us figures out some great new strategy or technique that works, we share it and say, hey, guess what? We figured out carbon rod number 325 is a fantastic solution. And we'll tell the guys in Marquette, Michigan the same thing. And they'll say, hey, all right, we'll go give that a try. They've done things and told us, and we've given it a try. So we share information, and it isn't just the Champlain program, it's the Sea Lamprey Control Program of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and their partners. And through that, we're able to maximize control everywhere that it's used. Wait, wasn't that a good political answer?
Yeah.
Yes.
Can we train the cormorants to eat?
If I had a dime for every time I heard that. Yeah.
Take the ones you catch to and give them a flavor of it.
We could do that, or I've even been asked, can I train sea lamprey to attach to cormorants and kill them? Right. So, yeah, I heard both sides. Right. No, I mean, the answer is basically no. Cormorants don't eat sea lamprey. Could they? Sure. I mean, anecdotally, it could happen. Do they have any impact on them? No. Because any sea lamprey that's going to be within range of a cormorant attacking it is going to be attached to a salmon that's 2 feet long. And a cormorant, I don't care how hungry it is, isn't going to swallow a 2 foot long salmon. So, yes?
We had a black bass in a boat eating one.
Oh, all right. You get a good pet for me, I appreciate that. So, any other questions? All right, thanks.
A huge thank you to Brad, to Brian, to Tom, to Andrew. Kevin Kelsey's here tonight from Edweed. If, he has a huge role in providing us those silver bullets that we love to fish for so much. Bill Jacobus, Tony, yep. And now, the raffle that everybody likes to come here for. A few things about the raffle. There's a handful of us that put a lot of hard work into providing these goodies for everybody every year, and every year it gets tougher and tougher. I mean, the 4 or 5 of us that put together these tables of products probably pester these guys with close to 50 or 60 emails to try to get these goodies for you. And every year it gets a little tougher. And we've got some really good local support from shops. Ramel from the Old Fishing Hole, Greg from Vermont Field Sports. Take a look at the products that are routinely here: Slide Diver, Vance, Daiwa, Ego Nets. I mean, these guys take care of us every year here. So when you do need something, think of those guys. More importantly, think about buying local. You might be able to shop around online and find it for a few bucks cheaper, but man, these guys are in our backyard. They're there to take care of us, and when you can, please support them and take care of them. So let's give away some goodies.